talked about this a little bit in a commentary before. I think I called it Titan fail, bots, or noob. But I said towards the end of the video that I disagree with the notion that multiplayer only games are inherently less valuable than a story driven game. So I think that for some people, the idea is that multiplayer is additional content worthy. And that's all it's ever worth. Especially if that multiplayer is limited only to competitive multiplayer. And even more especially if that competitive multiplayer does not have a lot of story. And I disagree with all of that. I feel like some gamers are too used to getting, I hate to have to use this phrase, but I can't, this is for lack of a better word, half-assed multiplayer components. And they don't see the potential of multiplayer. Now, don't get me wrong. There are some people who are just not into multiplayer, whether it be cooperative or competitive, especially competitive. That seems to draw a very strong wall sometimes to separate the community. But I feel like there are some people who just feel like competitive multiplayer is just never worth their time or money. There's no arguing that. But when it comes to whether or not competitive multiplayer is inherently less valuable production value wise, I'm thinking that makes absolutely no sense. The PC gets a lot of free to play competitive multiplayer games, but the thing about those games is that they are not as big of projects as, let's say, BioShock Infinite or Metro Last Light or Tomb Raider or Gears of War or stuff like that. And it is not because it's only competitive multiplayer. It is simply because developers didn't make it that way. And so I feel like it's not fair to say competitive multiplayer is only going to be as good as the free-to-play games on PC, or only going to be as good as the half-ass multiplayer components that we've gotten on consoles for like a decade. I think that's limiting yourself. That's limiting the potential of your imagination when it comes to that realm of gaming. That competitive gaming can get a lot more advanced than it is today, where it could potentially even be more cost effective, or not cost effective, but even more expensive to produce than freaking single player. I think that today, typically that is the case. Competitive multiplayer is too often either treated as additional content or it's an indie project, where you don't have big studios like Rockstar developing a competitive multiplayer only game. And for that reason, you never see a game of that higher production values for that genre. But don't get it confused. Just because it hasn't happened doesn't mean it's not possible. So I hate how people are saying, oh, Titanfall's not worth the money because it's only multiplayer. Meaning that, you know, pretty much I feel like what they're trying to insinuate is that Titanfall is not a full game, is what they're trying to say. Like, Titanfall's multiplayer could have been pulled off even if they would have focused on single player as well. I feel like that doesn't make any sense. I feel like they don't understand what they're talking about. That game, it looks like to me, had to be designed from the ground up for multiplayer. In order for it to be as good as it was, they had to focus on multiplayer. And I'm sure that if they understood it was going to make them millions upon millions of dollars, that they would have put in a single player if they could. But I just feel like, I hate how people just only feel like multiplayer is only worth additional content just because you've been used to that. It just doesn't, like, you honestly think that The Last of Us couldn't have been 3,000 times better when it comes to competitive multiplayer, or Gears of War, or what's another one that was tacked on, Uncharted, or Tomb Raider. Like, these multiplayer games get so much better. But people think, no, you know, because those multiplayer components are not worth $60, that doesn't mean that no multiplayer component is worth $60. Just because those, or Call of Duty on its own would not be worth $60, I feel, when it comes to competitive multiplayer. It just seems like it was single player gameplay ported over into a multiplayer field. What was another one that was like that? Grand Theft Auto Online. Grand Theft Auto Online would not be worth $60 because you compare that to the single player, obviously it's nowhere near as thorough. Grand Theft Auto 5 would be worth $60 if it was just single player, but it would not be if it were the inverse. But that is not because Grand Theft Auto Online doesn't have the potential to be worth $60. It just so happens that they didn't put their development focus on that part. And that's all I'm trying to say, is that these multiplayer games could be a lot better than they actually are, but they aren't. And so people feel like they couldn't be because it hasn't been proven yet. And that sucks. I just really wish people would stop acting like multiplayer is just inherently not as thorough as single player. Like, no matter what developers do, multiplayer is never going to be worth $60. The only way it can be is if they add 3,000 maps to the game. That's bullcrap, man. I think that's bullcrap, honestly. I don't think they have to add a ton of maps. It just has to, you can show production value elsewhere. You know, they can have a lot of voice acting, a lot of atmosphere, a lot of design that went into the customizable options or the gameplay, a lot of elements in the game, or a lot of processing that's required under the hood for the matchmaking, for the hit detection, for all the stuff going on screen. Like, it can get there. Just because developers have not done it doesn't mean it's not possible. And so I hate that, man, because that's where my money goes, right? And I just hate to feel like people are trying to make that argument. Oh, no, Titanfall, is it worth $60? No, because it's only multiplayer. That's not a good argument. Explain to me why that is not warrant enough for $60. Don't just say it's just because it's multiplayer. That doesn't make any sense. That's like me saying just because it's single player. And people are going to be like, well, no, that doesn't make any sense at all. Single player is just better. No, I'm sorry, but that is not inherently true. Sometimes single player is not good. Sometimes multiplayer is not good. It can be either or. You know, no one complains about BioShock Infinite only being single player. Well, people do, but I mean, no one feels like it's not worth $60 anymore. They will still easily hand over $60. Metro Last Light, people will still easily hand over $60. But when it's just multiplayer, nope. The price needs to be dropped by 3/4, because multiplayer is only additional content worthy. I'm like, okay, no, I'm sorry, but that doesn't make any sense, man. Judge the game on an individual basis, I feel, regardless of the game mode. It may only have multiplayer, but it has the potential to be worth the money. I'm just saying, that's all I'm saying. Like, don't just leave it, it's just multiplayer, okay? And what makes single player more valuable? Nothing. It's just that's where developers tend to actually go hard, and so you tend to get more money's worth than single player, only because that's how developers make the games. But it's not the fact that it's single player. It's not the fact that it's story driven. So yeah, tell me what you guys feel. I'm out. Peace.